The room had gone silent, not the comfortable silence of meditation or prayer, but the heavy, suffocating silence that comes when something has gone catastrophically wrong, when reality has just collided with carefully constructed fantasy and everyone knows it, when the mask has slipped and there's no way to put it back on. Governor Newsom sat at the witness table, his mouth opening and closing like a fish pulled from water. No words came out. Nothing. Behind him, his communications director had lost every drop of color from her face, pale as winter snow. His chief of staff stared at the polished wood table as if it might open up and swallow him whole. Even the photographers, who'd been clicking away all morning like mechanical insects, had gone completely still, their cameras hung at their sides, useless. Senator John Kennedy waited. His Louisiana drawl, usually warm as August honey dripping from a spoon, had gone cold as January ice. His question hung in the air between them like a blade suspended by a thread. Where exactly did $20 billion go? The silence stretched. 5 seconds. 10. An eternity on camera. An eternity for a man whose entire career had been built on never being at a loss for words. The television cameras captured every microsecond of Newsom's paralysis, every flicker of panic in his eyes, every twitch of uncertainty in his jaw. This was the moment everything changed. The moment Gavin Newsom's presidential ambitions didn't just stumble, they shattered. Like a wine glass dropped on marble. Complete, irreversible, final. 6 hours earlier, the morning had belonged to Gavin Newsom. Completely and totally belonged to him. He'd entered that Senate hearing room the way a champion enters an arena he's already conquered, the way a matador enters a ring where the bull has already been defeated. The suit was immaculate, charcoal gray, tailored so precisely it probably cost more than most American families spend on groceries in 6 months. Every seam perfect, every line clean. The hair was camera-ready perfection, that signature silver-swept style that had graced 1,000 magazine covers, that had become as recognizable as a brand logo. Behind him walked his team. Not beside him, behind him. 3 paces back like courtiers following a king, like attendants trailing royalty. 2 senior aides, a communications director and a deputy chief of staff, each one carrying tablets loaded with backup materials, statistics, talking points, responses to anticipated questions. Materials they were absolutely certain, completely confident, wouldn't be needed today. This wasn't just another hearing. Everyone in that room knew it. Everyone watching knew it. This was theater. This was destiny unfolding. This was history in the making. The Senate Budget Committee had named the session State Fiscal Policies and Federal Impact, California as Case Study. A bureaucratic title, a boring title, but nobody was fooled. This was Gavin Newsom's unofficial launch party for 2028, his coming-out event, his moment to showcase the California model to a national audience, to position himself as the future of the Democratic Party, the heir apparent, the next great progressive champion who would lead America into a new era. The media presence proved it beyond any doubt. Twice as many cameras as any normal budget hearing would ever see. 3 times as many. CNN had sent a full crew, their A-team, their best people. MSNBC had dispatched their political heavy hitters, the commentators everyone recognized. Fox News had multiple correspondents positioned strategically around the room, angles covered from every direction. All 3 major networks had cameras rolling, feeds live, producers watching intently. Political reporters who usually treated committee hearings like dental appointments, something to be endured and escaped from as quickly as possible, were fighting for seats in the press gallery. Actually fighting, elbowing each other, calling in favors. Newsom took it all in with the practiced ease of a man who'd lived his entire adult life in front of cameras, who'd been performing for audiences since before he could legally drink. The Democratic senators smiled warmly as he passed their section. Genuine smiles, admiring smiles. Senator Warren actually waved, a small gesture of solidarity and support. Senator Murphy looked at him with something close to reverence, the way a young actor might look at Meryl Streep walking onto a set. This was their champion, their future, their hope. The Republican side was cooler, more reserved, more guarded, but not hostile, not yet. Most of them wore expressions of resignation, like men about to watch a performance they couldn't compete with but had to sit through anyway. Like critics forced to attend a play they already knew would win all the awards. Senator Grassley reviewed his notes without looking up, rustling papers methodically. Senator Cornyn scrolled through his phone, apparently more interested in emails than in the governor's grand entrance. And at the far end of the dais sat Senator John Kennedy of Louisiana. Kennedy was shuffling papers slowly, deliberately, reading glasses perched on his nose like a librarian or a country schoolteacher, apparently paying no attention whatsoever to the governor's grand entrance, to the spectacle unfolding before him. His desk looked like a bomb had gone off in a filing cabinet, folders everywhere, documents stacked in seemingly random piles, haphazard and chaotic. A particularly thick stack, one that one of his aides had carried in that morning with both hands, sat off to one side, unremarkable, unnoticed. Newsom's eyes swept past Kennedy without pause, without concern, without even a flicker of interest. He knew the type, had dealt with dozens just like him throughout his political career. The folksy country lawyer act, the aw shucks routine that supposedly hid a razor-sharp mind underneath. The homespun wisdom delivered in a drawl thick as molasses, slow as cold honey. Newsom had faced politicians like this his entire career. They asked their gotcha questions, fishing for a sound bite they could use in campaign ads. He delivered his polished, focus-grouped responses that gave them nothing to use. The news cycle moved on within hours. Nothing to worry about. Nothing at all. Just another performance. Just another show. Kennedy glanced up from his papers and their eyes met briefly. Just a moment. A fraction of a second. Kennedy smiled, warm as summer sunshine, friendly as a neighbor welcoming you to the neighborhood, and gave a small nod of acknowledgement. A gesture of basic courtesy. Nothing more. Newsom nodded back, already dismissing him completely in his mind. Just another country senator playing dress-up in Washington. Just another speed bump on the inevitable road to the White House. Just another performance to get through. He had absolutely no idea what was about to happen. No conception. No warning. No sense of the trap that had been carefully, methodically, patiently set. Chairman Sanders called the hearing to order at exactly 10:00 a.m. His voice carried the authority of decades in the Senate, the weight of a man who'd been in Washington longer than some of his colleagues had been alive. Today's hearing will examine state fiscal policies and their impact on federal programs and the national economy. We've invited Governor Gavin Newsom of California to share his state's experience with progressive economic policies. He looked directly at Newsom. Governor Newsom, thank you for joining us. You may proceed with your opening statement. Newsom activated his microphone with a practiced gesture. The smile he gave the cameras was vintage Newsom, confident without being arrogant, warm without being soft, approachable without being common. The smile that had won elections. The smile that had graced magazine covers. The smile that political consultants studied and tried to teach their own candidates to replicate. Thank you, Chairman Sanders, Ranking Member Grassley, and distinguished members of the committee. I'm honored to be here today to discuss California's approach to governance and economic development. What followed was, by any objective standard, a masterclass in political communication. His delivery had the polish of a TED Talk, the authority of a keynote speech, the warmth of a fireside chat. Conversational yet authoritative, packed with statistics but never boring, passionate yet controlled. He'd clearly spent weeks preparing this, maybe months, every word chosen carefully, every pause calculated, every gesture rehearsed until it looked completely natural. California is the fifth largest economy in the world, he declared, leaning into the microphone just enough to show engagement without seeming desperate. Not the fifth largest state economy, the fifth largest economy, period, larger than the United Kingdom, larger than India. Our GDP exceeds $3.6 trillion. He let that number settle, let it impress, let it establish his credibility. He clicked through invisible mental slides, hitting every talking point with the precision of a Swiss watch, the reliability of a German machine. Climate leadership. California has reduced greenhouse gas emissions by 20% from 2006 levels, while growing our economy by 70%. We've committed to 100% clean electricity by 2045. We're proving that environmental responsibility and economic growth aren't mutually exclusive. They're mutually reinforcing. Social investment. We've expanded healthcare coverage to include all low-income residents regardless of immigration status. We've raised the minimum wage to $16 an hour with further increases scheduled. We're investing in affordable housing, childcare, and education at unprecedented levels. Innovation. Silicon Valley continues to lead the world in technological advancement. California companies are at the forefront of artificial intelligence, clean energy, biotechnology, and the digital economy that's defining our future. His conclusion was pitch perfect. The kind of ending that would play beautifully in campaign ads, that would be quoted in news articles, that would trend on social media. California isn't just a state, it's a proof of concept, proof that progressive values, investment in people, protection of the environment, belief in the common good, these aren't just idealistic aspirations. They're practical policies that produce tangible results. They work, and they can work everywhere. He sat back, satisfied, confident, victorious. The Democratic senators were nodding like bobbleheads on a car dashboard. Senator Warren looked ready to give him a standing ovation right there in the Senate chamber. Even some of the Republicans seemed grudgingly impressed by the performance, if not the politics. The craft, if not the content. In the press gallery, reporters were already drafting their headlines. Newsom makes case for progressive governance. California governor delivers presidential-level performance. Newsom 2028 launch goes national. The narrative was writing itself. The story was already told. Kennedy was still shuffling papers, still apparently paying no attention, still acting like a country lawyer more interested in his filing system than in the political theater unfolding before him. The softball questions came exactly as expected, exactly as rehearsed. Senator Warren leaned into her microphone, her enthusiasm barely contained, practically vibrating with excitement. Governor Newsom, California has been a national leader on climate policy. Can you tell us more about how your state has balanced environmental protection with economic growth? Newsom's answer was expansive, detailed, utterly rehearsed. He spoke for 4 straight minutes about electric vehicle mandates, solar installations, cap-and-trade programs. He mentioned Tesla, which was awkward considering the company had fled California for Texas, but he pivoted smoothly past that inconvenient fact like a dancer gliding over a crack in the floor. Nobody called him on it. Nobody questioned it. Senator Murphy followed up on healthcare expansion. Another 4-minute answer, this time about Medi-Cal, the uninsured rate, and the moral imperative of universal coverage. Beautiful rhetoric, soaring language, nothing concrete, nothing measurable, just values and intentions and aspirations. Senator Whitehouse asked about technology and innovation. Newsom pivoted seamlessly into prepared remarks about artificial intelligence, California's world-class research universities, and the critical importance of federal investment in research and development. More beautiful words, more soaring rhetoric, more carefully crafted talking points that said everything and nothing simultaneously. With each question, Newsom grew more confident, more comfortable, more himself, more the politician who dominated California politics for 2 decades. He started adding commentary the questions hadn't requested. He interrupted senators mid-question to provide additional context they hadn't asked for. He glanced at the Republican side of the dais with something approaching pity, the way a professional athlete might look at amateurs playing the same sport. At one point, while discussing California's economy, he couldn't resist taking a shot, couldn't resist the temptation. Of course, some states have chosen a different path. Lower taxes, fewer regulations, less investment in public services. And we've seen the results. Crumbling infrastructure, poor health outcomes, widening inequality. He paused for effect. California has chosen to believe that government can be a force for good, and the results speak for themselves. Kennedy looked up briefly at that, made a small note on his legal pad with a pen that looked 40 years old, then went back to his papers as if nothing had happened, as if nothing particularly interesting had been said. Chairman Sanders worked through the Democratic questioners methodically, systematically. Each exchange followed the same comfortable pattern, the same predictable rhythm. Friendly question delivered with a smile, polished answer delivered with confidence. mutual congratulation, mutual admiration, a performance for the cameras. Newsom was enjoying himself now, visibly relaxed, treating the hearing less like testimony and more like an extended campaign event, an extended infomercial for his presidential ambitions. This was exactly what he'd come for. This was exactly what he'd hoped for: the exposure, the platform, the opportunity. When it came time for Republican questions, Senator Grassley led off with predictable queries about federal spending and state debt. Boring questions, technical questions, questions Newsom had answered 100 times before. He handled them easily, effortlessly, citing statistics about California's balanced budget requirement and rainy day fund, numbers he could recite in his sleep. Senator Cornyn asked about immigration policy. Newsom delivered his standard response about welcoming newcomers and the economic contributions of immigrants, a bit testier than the Democratic questions, a bit more defensive, but nothing he couldn't handle with one hand tied behind his back, nothing that would make the evening news or trend on Twitter. The clock ticked toward noon, lunchtime approaching, almost done. Newsom's staff began to relax behind him, shoulders dropped, breathing steadied. The worst seemed to be over. The performance had gone exactly as planned, better than planned. A home run, a grand slam, already mentally drafting the press release about his triumphant testimony. Then Chairman Sanders looked at his list and said the words that would change everything, the words that would alter the trajectory of American politics. "Senator Kennedy, you're recognized for 10 minutes. Kennedy activated his microphone slowly, methodically, like a man with all the time in the world. He removed his reading glasses with deliberate care, cleaned them carefully with his tie, a folksy gesture that made him look like someone's grandfather, put them back on with the same deliberate slowness. When he finally spoke, his voice was warm, almost grandfatherly, friendly as could be, disarming. "Governor Newsom, I appreciate you coming all this way, and I have to say that was quite a presentation. Quite a presentation indeed. Made me almost want to move to California." Newsom smiled graciously, magnanimously, the smile of a man accepting a compliment he believed was genuine. "We'd be happy to have you, Senator." "Almost," Kennedy repeated, holding up one finger like a professor making a critical point. "Almost, but I've got a few questions if you don't mind. Just trying to understand some things, just trying to get my head around a few details." "Of course, Senator, that's why I'm here." "Good, good." Kennedy picked up a document from his stack, thin paper, official-looking. "Now, you mentioned California is the 5th largest economy in the world. That's mighty impressive, very impressive indeed. And I noticed you had lots of statistics about GDP growth and climate emissions and such." "Yes, Senator, the data supports everything I said." "I'm sure it does, I'm sure it does." Kennedy nodded slowly. "But I noticed something you didn't mention, something that seems kind of important: population trends." He looked up, his expression one of innocent curiosity, pure, simple. "How many people moved to California last year versus how many left?" Newsom's smile flickered, just barely, just for a fraction of a second, but the cameras caught it. Every lens in the room zoomed in slightly. "Well, Senator, California continues to attract talent from around the world. We see significant international immigration, which more than offsets any domestic migration patterns." "I asked about net migration, Governor, people coming versus people going. Not international, not domestic separately, just total, net. The Census Bureau tracks this. Simple numbers. Do you know what their numbers show?" Newsom shifted slightly, almost imperceptibly. "There has been some domestic outmigration, primarily retirees seeking lower cost of living in other states. It's a natural demographic pattern, nothing unusual." "Mostly retirees," Kennedy repeated slowly, nodding. "Mostly retirees, I see, I see." He made a note on his pad, didn't push further, just moved on. "You mentioned climate leadership. California's committed to 100% clean electricity by 2045. That's ambitious, real ambitious, very ambitious. But I'm curious about something. How much did Californians pay for electricity last year compared to, say, folks in Louisiana?" Newsom shifted again, slightly more noticeably this time. Energy costs reflect our investment in clean technology. The long-term benefits far outweigh the short-term costs. When you factor in health benefits, environmental benefits, economic benefits. I didn't ask about long-term benefits, Governor. Kennedy's voice remained friendly, conversational, but there was an edge now, a subtle sharpness. I asked about the electricity bill, the number on the statement that arrives every month. Was it more or less than Louisiana? California's rates are higher, but when you factor in the health costs of pollution, the environmental costs of carbon emissions, just the electricity bills, Governor, Kennedy interrupted gently, politely. Higher or lower? A pause. Higher. How much higher? Newsom's staff began to stir behind him. His communications director was typing furiously on her tablet, pulling up numbers, searching for context, preparing damage control. I don't have the exact figures in front of me at this moment. I do, Kennedy said mildly. He pulled out a sheet of paper, clean, simple, official government statistics. According to the United States Energy Information Administration, that's a federal agency, Governor, not a partisan think tank, the average retail price of electricity in California was 22.4 cents per kilowatt hour in 2023. In Louisiana, it was 11.2 cents. He looked up. That means Californians pay exactly double what folks in my state pay for electricity. Exactly double. Not a little more. Not somewhat higher. Double. Senator, you can't put a price on clean air and a healthy environment. I'm not asking about clean air, Governor. I'm asking about electricity bills, and California's are double ours. Kennedy made another note. Interesting. Very interesting. He asked a few more questions after that, about tech companies relocating, about the film industry, about agricultural production. Newsom handled them reasonably well, regaining some of his composure, getting back into his rhythm, finding his footing again. Kennedy nodded along, made notes, seemed satisfied with the answers, seemed to be wrapping up. The 10 minutes were almost up. Newsom's staff began to relax again. The worst had passed, just a few tough questions, nothing devastating, nothing career-ending. They'd handled worse. They'd spin this easily. Kennedy gathered his papers as if preparing to yield back his time. Then he paused, looked up. Governor, just to make sure I have this right, because I want to be fair to you. I want to be completely fair. California's economy is thriving. Your policies are working. And the people who leave are mostly retirees looking for warmer weather and lower costs. Is that a fair summary of your testimony today? Newsom nodded confidently, relief washing over him. That's correct, Senator. California remains the place where people want to be, the place where the future happens. Good, Kennedy smiled. I just wanted to make sure I understood your position clearly. He picked up the thick folder from his desk, the one his aide had carried in that morning, the one nobody had paid attention to, because I have some questions about that. Kennedy opened the folder methodically, like a surgeon opening a medical kit, like a chess player revealing a prepared trap, like a man with all the time in the world and all the cards in his hand. Governor, I've got some data here from the United States Census Bureau, not a right-wing think tank, not Fox News, not the Heritage Foundation. The United States Census Bureau, a federal agency that's been counting Americans since 1790. He pulled out a chart and held it up. According to their numbers, between 2020 and 2023, California had a net domestic outmigration of approximately 1.2 million people. He let that number hang in the air. Let it breathe. Let it sink in. Let every camera capture it. 1.2 million. That's not a rounding error, Governor. That's not statistical noise. That's not a marginal trend. That's the entire population of Dallas, Texas, just up and leaving your state in 3 years. Gone. Newsom leaned forward, trying to regain control, trying to pivot. Senator, those numbers require context. The pandemic caused disruptions across the entire country. Economic disruption, housing disruption, remote work patterns. I'm giving you context, Kennedy said, and his voice had a new edge now, still friendly, still conversational, but sharper, much sharper, like a scalpel wrapped in velvet. The context is this. California lost more residents to domestic migration than any other state in America during that period. More than New York, more than Illinois, more than any other state. Nobody's even close. California is number one, first place, the undisputed champion of people leaving. He pulled out another document. Now, you said these were mostly retirees, but the census data breaks down who's leaving. And it turns out, Governor, it's not mostly retirees, it's working-age adults, families, people aged 25 to 54, the prime earning years, the people who pay taxes, the people who start businesses, the people who create jobs, the people who build communities. Those are the people fleeing California, your taxpayers, your entrepreneurs, your future. Newsom tried to interrupt. International immigration offsets those losses and actually creates net population growth when you factor in. I'm glad you mentioned that. Kennedy's eyes lit up slightly. I'm very glad you mentioned that. Yes, California does receive international immigrants, quite a few, but you know who many of those immigrants are, Governor. He paused. They're people whose work visas are sponsored by companies headquartered in California. Tech workers, engineers, programmers. They don't have a choice about where to go. Their employer tells them California or nothing, so they go to California. They have to. It's not voluntary, it's not a choice. He looked up from the paper, met Newsom's eyes directly. You're not attracting people, Governor. You're retaining captive employees while everyone who has a choice is running for the exits. Everyone who can leave is leaving. That's not success. That's failure. That's not a model, that's a warning. The room had gone very quiet now. Reporters leaning forward, cameras zooming in. This wasn't going according to anyone's script except Kennedy's. Now, you also mentioned in your opening statement that California's economy is thriving, fifth largest in the world. And that's true in a certain sense, in a purely statistical sense. But let's talk about what that economy actually looks like. Let's talk about who's staying and who's going. Kennedy pulled out a list, multiple pages. I want to read some names, Governor. These are companies that have moved their headquarters out of California in recent years. Just recent years. Not decades. Not ancient history, recent years. He began reading slowly, deliberately, letting each name land like a hammer blow. Tesla moved to Texas. Oracle moved to Texas. Hewlett-Packard Enterprise moved to Texas. Charles Schwab moved to Texas. CBRE Group moved to Texas. Palantir moved to Colorado. Jamba Juice moved to Texas. Jacobs Engineering moved to Texas. McKesson moved to Texas. He looked up. Do you notice a pattern, Governor? Do you see a theme here? Newsom's jaw tightened visibly. His hands gripped the edge of the table. Headquarters relocations are primarily symbolic. Many of these companies maintain significant operations in California. The actual economic impact is minimal. They're just moving a mailbox. Symbolic. Kennedy's eyebrows rose. Governor, when Tesla moves its headquarters, it takes jobs, executive jobs, high-paying jobs, decision-making jobs. When Oracle moves, it takes billions of dollars in economic activity. When all these companies move, they take their corporate taxes, their employee income taxes, their property taxes, their vendor contracts, their community investments, their charitable giving, their leadership, their presence. He spread the papers across his desk. According to the Hoover Institution at Stanford University, that's in California, Governor, not Texas. California lost over 350 company headquarters between 2018 and 2023. 350 businesses looked at your state and said, no thank you. They voted with their feet. They voted with their moving trucks. They voted with their corporate relocations. Kennedy leaned back in his chair. You came here to tell us California is a model, but the people who actually live there, the businesses who actually operate there, they're voting with their feet. And every single one of them is saying the same thing. California isn't working. Not anymore. Newsom opened his mouth to respond. His lips moved, but Kennedy wasn't finished. Not even close. So I'll ask you a simple question, Governor. A very simple question. If California's policies are so successful, if progressive governance works so well, why is everyone leaving? Why are your citizens fleeing? Why are your businesses relocating? Why is everyone who has a choice choosing somewhere else? For the first time all day, Newsom had no smooth answer ready. No pivot prepared. No talking point queued up. His mouth opened, closed, opened again. Nothing came out. The cameras captured every millisecond of his paralysis. Kennedy let the silence linger for a long moment. Let it breathe. Let it hang there like smoke. Then he shifted topics with the ease of a man changing television channels. Let's talk about something else you mentioned in your opening statement, Governor: social investment, helping the most vulnerable. You said California leads the nation in social services. Do you remember saying that? Newsom nodded cautiously, warily, trying to figure out where this was going. California has made unprecedented investments in our social safety net. We're proud of that record. Yes, yes, you have made investments, unprecedented investments. And one thing California certainly leads the nation in is homelessness. Is that fair to say? Homelessness is a complex, multifaceted issue affecting cities across America. It's not unique to California. Governor, Kennedy said patiently, I didn't ask if it was complex. I didn't ask if other cities have homeless people. I asked if California leads the nation in homelessness. Does it or doesn't it? We have a significant homeless population. Yes. According to the Department of Housing and Urban Development, that's HUD, Governor, another federal agency, California has approximately 180,000 homeless individuals. That's about 28% of all homeless people in America, in one state that contains about 12% of America's population. Kennedy removed his glasses and looked directly at Newsom. So you've got 12% of the population and 28% of the homeless. That's more than double your share. Is that number correct? Newsom's voice had grown tighter, more strained. The numbers reflect decades of underinvestment in affordable housing, market failures that predate my administration by many years, federal policies that— Is that number correct, Governor? 180,000 homeless people, yes or no? A pause. The numbers are approximately correct, yes. Thank you. Kennedy put his glasses back on and pulled out a thick document bound with a black clip, official-looking, heavy. Now here's what I find fascinating, Governor, absolutely fascinating, because California hasn't ignored this problem. Not at all. In fact, since 2019, California has spent approximately $20 billion on homelessness programs. $20 billion. With a B, he let that number sink in. Let it settle over the room like fog rolling in from the ocean. Governor, can you help me understand what $20 billion looks like? Because that's a hard number to visualize for ordinary people, for normal people who have never seen $1 billion. He didn't wait for an answer. $20 billion divided by 180,000 homeless individuals equals approximately $111,000 per person, per homeless person. If you just took that money and handed each homeless person a check, just a simple check, they could buy a house. A modest house maybe, not a mansion, not a palace, but an actual house with a roof and walls and a door that locks, a place to live. Kennedy spread out more documents methodically, like evidence at a trial. But you didn't do that. You spent it on programs, homeless services, administrative costs, consultants, studies, coordination efforts, task forces, committees, meetings about meetings. He paused. So let me ask you this. After spending $20 billion, by how much has the homeless population decreased? Just a number, just a simple number. Newsom shifted in his seat. These programs take time to show results. The research shows that housing-first approaches work, but they require sustained investment over many years. You can't expect. How much has it decreased, Governor? Kennedy interrupted gently. Just give me a number, up or down, more homeless or fewer homeless. Simple question. There are metrics that show progress in certain areas, reductions in unsheltered homelessness in specific counties, improvements in service access. Governor, Kennedy's voice was patient but firm. I'm asking a simple question, the simplest question possible. You spent $20 billion. Did the number of homeless people go up or did it go down? Up or down? That's all I'm asking. A long pause. The cameras zoomed in on Newsom's face, every muscle, every micro-expression. The numbers have fluctuated year to year. Kennedy nodded slowly. Fluctuated, that's an interesting word, very interesting, very carefully chosen. He pulled out another document. Let me tell you what the actual numbers show. According to California's own data, your own state government's official reports, The homeless population has increased by approximately 30% since you took office. 30%. He leaned forward. You spent $20 billion and the problem got 30% worse. Not a little worse. Not marginally worse. 30% worse. Does that sound like a successful program to you, Governor? Does that sound like money well spent? Newsom attempted to respond, his voice rising slightly, getting defensive. The pandemic created unprecedented challenges: economic disruption, job losses, housing instability. You can't evaluate these programs without accounting for the pandemic, Kennedy said, and his voice sharpened like a knife being unsheathed. Other states had pandemics too, Governor. Texas had a pandemic. Florida had a pandemic. Louisiana had a pandemic. Ohio had a pandemic. Pennsylvania had a pandemic. Every state in America had the exact same pandemic at the exact same time. Their homeless populations didn't increase by 30%. So what's different about California? What's unique about California's pandemic that caused homelessness to explode? Kennedy pulled out more documents and spread them across his desk like a poker player revealing a winning hand. So I started asking myself a question, a simple question. Where did $20 billion actually go? What happened to it? And the answers I found are illuminating. Deeply, deeply illuminating. He read from the papers. Item 1. Administrative overhead. According to a state audit, California's own state audit, some homeless programs spent over 40% of their budgets on administration. 40 cents of every dollar, not going to homeless people, not building shelters, not providing services, going to salaries, offices, paperwork, meetings, conferences, retreats, consultants studying consultants. 40% administrative overhead. In the private sector, that would be considered fraud. Item 2. Consultants and studies. California spent hundreds of millions of dollars, hundreds of millions on consultants to study homelessness, to write reports about homelessness, to develop strategies for addressing homelessness, to conduct further studies about why the previous studies didn't work, to study the studies about the studies. Meanwhile, the homeless population kept growing, kept getting bigger, kept getting worse. Item 3. Real estate purchases. The state bought properties for homeless housing at prices that would make a Manhattan real estate developer blush, would make them jealous. I found one project in Los Angeles that spent $600,000 per unit. $600,000 for a single apartment, a single unit. In some California neighborhoods, nice California neighborhoods, you could buy a 3-bedroom house for that amount. But California spent it on a single apartment for a homeless person. Item 4. Programs with no measurable outcomes. Hundreds of millions of dollars went to service providers who couldn't demonstrate any results whatsoever. None. Zero. No tracking of how many people they helped. No measurement of success rates. No accountability for outcomes. Just money going out the door like water through a sieve, like throwing cash into the ocean. Kennedy gathered the papers into a neat stack. Precise, methodical. Governor, I'm not an accountant, I'm just a simple country lawyer, but I can add. And what I see is $20 billion spent with almost nothing to show for it. Either the money was wasted through incompetence, or it was stolen through corruption, or some combination of both. One way or another, $20 billion is gone, vanished, disappeared. He looked directly at Newsom. The television cameras zoomed in tight on both their faces. So I'm going to ask you one more time, and I'd appreciate a straight answer. Where exactly did $20 billion go? The silence stretched like taffy being pulled, like a rubber band about to snap. Newsom's communications director was furiously typing on her tablet. His chief of staff had his head in his hands. His senior aide was whispering urgently into a phone, probably calling everyone in Sacramento who might be able to help, might have an answer, might know what to say. Newsom finally spoke, his voice strained, tight. Senator, homelessness is the result of complex systemic factors: housing costs, mental health challenges, substance abuse issues, inadequate federal support. These are problems that no single state can solve alone. Governor, Kennedy interrupted, and his voice was cold now, ice cold. I didn't ask you why people are homeless. I didn't ask about root causes. I didn't ask about systemic factors. I asked you where the money went. $20 billion of California taxpayers' money. Can you tell me specifically where it went and what results it achieved? Can you account for it? We have invested in a range of programs and services across multiple counties: shelter operations, outreach teams, mental health services, substance abuse treatment, permanent supportive housing. Can you tell me how many people those programs helped get off the streets and stay off the streets? How many people have permanent housing now who didn't before? Just a number. We're developing metrics to track long-term outcomes. We're implementing new data systems to measure effectiveness across different interventions. Governor, Kennedy's voice rose slightly, not shouting, but louder, sharper. After spending $20 billion, you're still developing metrics. You don't know if your programs work. You can't tell me how many people you've helped. You can't show me results. Newsom's face was flushed now, red creeping up his neck. The polished veneer was cracking, visibly cracking. These are complex social programs that require time to evaluate properly. You can't expect immediate results. Kennedy shook his head slowly. You came here to tell us California is a model, but the model seems to be this: spend vast amounts of money, achieve no measurable results, blame complex systemic factors, ask for more money, repeat, repeat forever. He made a note on his legal pad. That's not a model, Governor. That's a racket. That's a grift. That's a scam. Chairman Sanders looked at the clock, clearly uncomfortable, shifting in his seat. Senator Kennedy, I believe your time has expired. Mr. Chairman, Kennedy said without looking away from Newsom, I'd like to request additional time if my colleagues will indulge me. I have several more areas to cover that I believe are critical to this committee's understanding, critical to the American people's understanding. Senator Grassley, the ranking Republican, nodded immediately, enthusiastically. I'll yield the ranking member's time to Senator Kennedy. This is important. This is very important. Sanders looked uncomfortable, trapped, but he couldn't object without appearing partisan, without looking like he was protecting Newsom. Senator Kennedy, you're recognized for an additional 10 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate your indulgence. Kennedy pulled out a new folder, thicker than the others, older-looking, yellowed paper. Governor, let's take a trip down memory lane. Back to 2008. Seems like a long time ago now. You were lieutenant governor then, if I recall correctly. Newsom nodded wearily. He knew where this was going. I remember. California voters approved Proposition 1A, the high-speed rail bond measure. Do you remember the promises that were made to California voters? The specific promises, the concrete commitments. Newsom nodded again. I remember the initiative. Let me refresh everyone's memory. Kennedy pulled out faded campaign materials, old brochures that looked like museum pieces, artifacts from another era. Proposition 1A promised high-speed rail connecting Los Angeles and San Francisco. Travel time, 2 hours and 40 minutes. Completion date, 2020. Total cost, $33 billion. Funded by a mix of federal grants, state bonds, and private investment. He set down the papers carefully. That was the promise California voters approved. A bullet train connecting your 2 largest cities in under 3 hours. Fast, modern, efficient, reliable. The kind of thing they have in Japan and France and China. The future of transportation. California leading America into the future. Kennedy looked up. So here we are, Governor. 17 years later. How many miles of high-speed rail track are currently operational in California? How many miles can a California resident actually ride on right now today? Newsom straightened his tie, a nervous gesture, subconscious. The project has faced significant challenges: litigation, environmental reviews, cost overruns. These large infrastructure projects always take longer than initially projected. How many miles are operational, Governor? Construction is actively underway in the Central Valley. We're making real progress, real tangible progress. Thousands of jobs have been created. How many miles, Governor? Kennedy enunciated each word carefully, slowly. It's a simple question, the simplest possible question. If I wanted to ride California's high-speed rail today, right now, this afternoon, How many miles could I travel? Just give me the number. A long pause. The cameras caught Newsom's face perfectly, every angle, every expression. 0. Kennedy nodded slowly. 0. 17 years. $20 billion spent so far. And 0 miles of operational high-speed rail. Not one single mile that any citizen can actually use. Not 1 mile that provides any transportation value whatsoever. 0. He pulled out another document. Now, let's talk about cost. The original estimate was $33 billion. $30. What's the current estimate to complete the full Los Angeles to San Francisco system? What are we looking at now? Newsom sighed audibly. Cost estimates have been revised due to inflation, regulatory requirements, environmental mitigation. What's the current estimate, Governor? Just the number. Approximately $128 billion for the full Los Angeles to San Francisco system. Kennedy let out a low whistle. $128 billion. Let me do the math here for everyone watching at home, for everyone who's paying attention. That's roughly 4 times the original estimate. 4 times, not a little over, not somewhat higher. 4 times. He shook his head. The project is 17 years behind schedule, 0% complete, and 4 times over budget. 4 times. He shook his head again, this time in genuine wonder, genuine amazement. And here's the best part, Governor, the absolute best part. The section currently under construction, the only section with any active work happening. It doesn't connect Los Angeles and San Francisco, not even close. Do you know what cities it connects? Newsom said nothing, just stared at the table. Merced to Bakersfield, Kennedy answered himself. Merced to Bakersfield. Now, I don't mean any disrespect to Merced or Bakersfield. I'm sure they're fine communities, lovely places, good people. But Governor, can you tell me with a straight face how many people are desperately waiting for high-speed rail between Merced and Bakersfield? How many people are standing at train stations right now wishing they could get from Merced to Bakersfield faster? A few people in the gallery laughed nervously, uncomfortable laughter. Kennedy didn't smile, didn't acknowledge it. This isn't funny, though. This isn't a joke, because California voters were promised something real. They approved real money. $9.95 billion in bonds that California taxpayers are still paying interest on, still paying for. And what they got in return is 17 years of studies, environmental reviews, lawsuits, delays, and a construction project that connects 2 cities that nobody particularly needs to travel between quickly. Kennedy pulled out one more document. You know what's happening in Texas right now, Governor, right now as we speak. A private company, no government money, no taxpayer bonds, is building high-speed rail between Houston and Dallas. Expected completion, 2026. Total cost, about $30 billion. That's less than a quarter of your estimate. 1/4. And they're actually going to finish it, with private money. People investing their own capital because they believe it will work. Because they think they can actually complete it and operate it profitably. He spread his hands wide. So let me ask you this. Why can a private company in Texas build a high-speed rail system faster and cheaper than California can with unlimited taxpayer money and the full power of state government behind it? What does that tell us about the California model? What does that tell us about government efficiency? What does that tell us about progressive governance? Newsom attempted a response, his voice defensive. The Texas project has faced its own challenges and delays. There's no guarantee they'll meet their timeline. Has it spent $128 billion with 0 miles to show for it? No, but then whatever challenges they've faced, Governor, they're ahead of you, way ahead of you, miles ahead of you. Kennedy gathered his high-speed rail documents and set them aside neatly. Governor, you came here to tell us California is a model of progressive governance. But your signature infrastructure project, the one that was supposed to prove government can build big things, can accomplish great projects, is a 17-year, $128 billion hole in the ground connecting nowhere to nowhere. A monument to government incompetence. A case study in how not to build infrastructure. He looked directly at Newsom. Is this the model you want other states to follow? Is this what you want to bring to the White House? Is this what you want to do to America? Kennedy paused to take a sip of water, slow sip, deliberate. When he resumed, his tone had shifted, less folksy, more serious, more personal, more pointed. Governor, I want to talk about November 2020. The COVID-19 pandemic was raging. California was under strict lockdown orders, the strictest in the nation. Orders you signed, orders you enforced. Do you remember what those orders prohibited? Newsom's posture stiffened. His entire body language changed. Defensive, guarded. He knew exactly where this was going. The orders were based on CDC guidance and public health recommendations from our state health officials. We were trying to save lives during an unprecedented crisis. What did they prohibit, Governor? Specifically, let's be specific for the American people watching. Kennedy pulled out a printed copy of California's November 2020 COVID restrictions. The document was heavily highlighted, annotated. No indoor dining at restaurants. No gatherings of more than 3 households. Wear masks at all times when outside your home. Avoid all non-essential travel. And this is important. The Thanksgiving guidance specifically told Californians not to gather with people outside their immediate household, not to see extended family, not to have traditional Thanksgiving dinners. He looked up. Governor, you went on television multiple times. You looked directly into the camera and told California families they couldn't have Thanksgiving together. You told grandparents they couldn't see their grandchildren. You told parents their college kids couldn't come home for the holiday. You told families they had to stay apart. This is about saving lives, you said. We all have to make sacrifices. Do you remember saying that? Newsom's jaw was tight. I was following public health guidance, trying to prevent deaths, trying to save lives. Do you remember where you were on November 6th, 2020? Silence, complete silence. Newsom knew. Everyone in the room knew what was coming. Kennedy pulled out an enlarged photograph, held it up high enough for everyone in the room to see, for every camera to capture. This is the French Laundry restaurant in Napa Valley, 3 Michelin stars, one of the finest restaurants in America, one of the most exclusive, about $350 per person for dinner, more if you order wine. And this photograph, published by local news media, shows you there on November 6, 2020, just weeks before you told Californians they couldn't gather for Thanksgiving. He held up the photo higher. Let me describe what we're looking at for anyone watching at home. A large group gathered around a table. Indoor. I count at least 12 people. No masks visible anywhere. Not one. Indoor dining at a time when your own executive order prohibited indoor dining. Multiple households gathered together when your own order prohibited gatherings of more than 3 households. Kennedy set down the photo carefully. Governor, by your own executive order, by your own law, this gathering was illegal. You violated every single restriction you told Californians to follow, every single one. No indoor dining, no large gatherings, masks required. You violated every single rule in one dinner. Newsom leaned into his microphone, his voice tight, defensive. I've acknowledged that was a mistake. I apologized. Multiple times. I shouldn't have been there, I know that. Steak. Kennedy's voice sharpened like a knife being drawn. Governor, while you were eating $350 dinners with lobbyists, Governor, small business owners across California were watching their restaurants die. They were laying off employees they'd known for 20 years. Employees who were like family. They were defaulting on their leases. They were losing businesses their families had built over generations. Some of them were losing everything. Their life's work, their dreams, everything. He leaned forward. And it wasn't just restaurants. Families were being told they couldn't gather for Thanksgiving. Church congregations couldn't worship together. Funerals were limited to 10 people. People were dying alone in hospitals because their families couldn't visit, couldn't hold their hands, couldn't say goodbye. Children couldn't see their grandparents. Grandparents couldn't hold their newborn grandchildren, couldn't be there for the most important moments. Kennedy's voice dropped lower. And you were at the French Laundry, eating tasting menus with lobbyists, no masks, large gathering, indoor dining, everything you told everyone else they couldn't do, breaking every rule while everyone else sacrificed. He pulled out another document. Let's talk about who else was at that dinner, the person whose birthday you were celebrating, That was Jason Kinney. Correct. Newsom didn't respond, just sat there. A lobbyist, Kennedy continued. A political consultant who has made millions from clients who do business with the state of California. Clients who need things from your administration. Clients who need permits, approvals, contracts, favorable treatment. And also at that dinner were executives from the California Medical Association, the same organization that was publicly supporting your lockdown policies. The same doctors who were going on television telling ordinary Californians to stay home, to sacrifice, to miss their holidays. Those doctors were at this dinner with you, breaking every rule you had imposed. Kennedy shook his head slowly. Governor, you know what we call that in Louisiana. We have a name for it. We call it rules for thee but not for me. The people who make the rules don't think the rules apply to them. They're for the little people, the ordinary folks, not for the elites, not for the people at the French Laundry. He paused. And you know what else we call people who make rules they don't follow themselves? We have a word for that. It starts with H. Do you want me to say it, Governor? Or would you like to? I've apologized for that dinner multiple times. I've taken responsibility. You apologized because you got caught. Kennedy's voice cut through like a chainsaw. Someone at the restaurant leaked that photo to the media and suddenly you had to apologize. Suddenly you had to take responsibility. But if that photo hadn't leaked, Governor, if no one had taken that picture, would you have apologized? Would you have even mentioned it? Would you have felt any guilt whatsoever? Silence, damning silence. The answer, Kennedy continued, is no. You would have kept telling Californians to sacrifice, to stay home, to miss their holidays, to follow the rules, all while you lived by different rules. Because the rules in your mind aren't for people like you. They're for the little people. The ordinary Californians who don't have lobbyist friends with access to $350 dinners at Michelin-starred restaurants. Kennedy gathered the French Laundry documents carefully. You talk about progressive values, Governor, about caring for the vulnerable, about shared sacrifice, about we're all in this together. But when it was your turn to sacrifice, when it was your turn to miss a fancy dinner, when it was your turn to follow your own rules, you couldn't do it. You wouldn't do it. He looked directly at Newsom. And that tells me everything I need to know about your values, everything I need to know about who you really are. Kennedy consulted his notes and turned to yet another folder. Governor, let's talk about public safety. In 2014, California passed Proposition 47. You supported it. You campaigned for it. You called it enlightened reform. Can you tell me what that proposition did? Newsom cleared his throat, tried to regain his composure. It reclassified certain nonviolent offenses to reduce mass incarceration. It was about criminal justice reform, about giving people second chances, about not destroying lives over minor mistakes. It raised the threshold for felony theft from $450 to $950. Any theft under $950 became a misdemeanor. Essentially, you told criminals steal up to $949 and it's just a ticket. Is that an accurate description? That's an oversimplification. The intent was to reduce prison overcrowding and focus resources on serious crime. Is the $950 threshold accurate? Yes, but the broader context. Thank you. Kennedy pulled out a stack of papers, news articles, reports, video stills. Since Proposition 47 passed, organized retail theft in California has exploded. And I'm not using that word casually. I mean exploded like a bomb going off, like a volcano erupting. He began reading from news articles, one after another. Target closed 9 stores in California, citing organized retail crime. Walgreens closed multiple San Francisco locations for the same reason. Nordstrom Rack, CVS, Old Navy, Whole Foods, all reducing their California presence because of theft, because they can't operate profitably when half their inventory walks out the door. He looked up, and it's not just statistics, Governor. There are videos, hundreds of them, thousands maybe. Videos that went viral across the country, across the world, showing people walking into California stores, filling garbage bags with merchandise and walking out. Just walking out. In broad daylight. Security guards standing there doing absolutely nothing because they've been told not to intervene. Police not responding because what's the point when it's just a misdemeanor? When there's no real consequence? When the criminals will be back on the street in an hour? Kennedy described the scenes. Flash mobs of thieves hitting luxury stores on Rodeo Drive, smash and grab robberies in broad daylight, cars backing up to store entrances to load stolen goods like they're loading groceries at Costco. And in every single video, the same thing. Nobody stops them. Nobody intervenes. Because in California, stealing $949 worth of merchandise is basically a parking ticket, a minor inconvenience. He set down the papers. Governor, when the whole country watched those videos, when the whole world watched those videos, what do you think they saw? What do you think they learned about California? They saw lawlessness. They saw a state that had given up on enforcing basic property rights. They saw chaos. They saw anarchy. They saw your California model in action. Newsom attempted a response, his voice rising. Crime is a complex issue. These incidents, while troubling, don't represent the full picture of public safety in California. Crime rates overall have been declining. Don't represent what? Kennedy interrupted. California has the highest rate of property crime in the nation. According to FBI statistics, not right-wing media, not Fox News, the FBI, is that not representative? Many of those statistics reflect reporting differences between jurisdictions. You can't make direct comparisons without accounting for. Governor, Kennedy held up his hand. I've heard that excuse from every politician whose city or state has a crime problem. The statistics don't tell the whole story. The data is complicated. You can't make comparisons. But you know what does tell a story? A clear, simple story that anyone can understand. He leaned forward. Target closing 9 stores. Walgreens leaving San Francisco, a city they'd been in for decades. Businesses putting toothpaste and deodorant behind locked plexiglass so customers need an employee with a key just to buy basic necessities. Having to ask permission to buy deodorant. That tells a story, Governor. That tells a very clear story. Kennedy's voice grew more serious. Let me tell you who really suffers from this, Governor, because it's not the big corporations. Target has insurance. Walgreens will survive. They'll write off the losses and move on. They'll be fine. The people who suffer are the small business owners. The mom-and-pop shops that can't afford to lose inventory to theft every single day. The Korean grocer who saved for 20 years to open a store and watches teenagers walk in and clean out the shelves while he can't do anything about it. The family pharmacy that can't afford security guards and plexiglass cases for every product. Those are the people who suffer. And it's the people who live in those neighborhoods. When Walgreens closes, where do elderly people get their prescriptions? When grocery stores leave, where do families buy food? Where do they shop? They have to travel farther, spend more time, spend more money on transportation. Your policies don't hurt rich people, Governor. Rich people just drive to another neighborhood, another store. Your policies devastate poor communities, the very people you claim to care about the most. The people your progressive policies are supposed to help. Kennedy pulled out one more document. Let's talk about San Francisco specifically, the city you used to run as mayor, the city you're proud of. Open-air drug markets operating without any interference whatsoever. None. Fentanyl overdose deaths up 400% since 2019. 400%. Human feces on sidewalks so common that there's literally an app. I'm not making this up. There's actually an app that San Franciscans can use to report and track human feces on public streets. In America, in 2024, he shook his head. Governor, I've been to San Francisco multiple times. It's one of the most beautiful cities in America. Maybe the most beautiful, the bay, the bridges, the hills, the Victorian houses, the cable cars, the Golden Gate, stunning, breathtaking. And you have turned it into a place where people step over needles and human waste on their way to work, where tourists are warned not to leave anything visible in their cars, not even a jacket, not even a phone charger, because their windows will be smashed, where residents have just given up, just accepted that this is normal now. This is just how things are. Kennedy gathered all his papers together. You came here to tell us California is a model, but what I see is a state where criminals steal with impunity, where drug addicts die on the streets while drug dealers operate openly, where businesses flee and families lock their doors and pray. That's not a model, Governor. That's a cautionary tale. That's what happens when ideology trumps common sense, when appearing compassionate matters more than actually helping people, when sounding progressive matters more than making progress. He looked at the clock, and that's what you want to export to the rest of America. That's what you want to bring to the White House. And I think after today, most Americans will say, no thank you. We're good. We'll pass. Chairman Sanders shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Senator Kennedy, I believe your time has expired again. Mr. Chairman, Kennedy said, with your indulgence, I have just a few more questions and then I'll wrap up. I promise we're almost done. Just a few more minutes. Sanders looked at the other committee members. No one objected. They all wanted to see where this was going, how this would end. Very well, proceed. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Kennedy set aside all his folders, pushed them to the side of his desk, cleared the space. When he spoke again, his voice was different, quieter, more serious, almost sad, genuinely sad. Governor Newsom, I want to thank you for coming here today. I mean that sincerely. I truly do, because the American people needed to see this. They needed to hear this. They needed to understand what the California model really means. He paused, let the words settle over the room like dust after an explosion. You walked into this room 6 hours ago with your perfectly tailored suit and your focus group talking points. You were ready. You were prepared. You were going to tell us that California is the future, that progressive policies work, that you, Gavin Newsom, should be trusted with even more power, maybe the highest power in the land, the presidency itself. Kennedy gestured to the documents spread across his desk. But here's what the American people actually saw today. Here's what they learned. They saw a governor whose citizens are fleeing in record numbers. 1.2 million people in 3 years. Not moving, fleeing, voting with their feet that California isn't worth it anymore. They saw a state that spent $20 billion on homelessness and has nothing to show for it except more homeless people, more suffering, more failure, more waste. They saw a $128 billion train project that, after 17 years, connects nowhere to nowhere. A monument to government incompetence. A case study in everything that's wrong with government infrastructure projects. They saw a leader who locked down his state, who told families they couldn't have Thanksgiving together, who told people they couldn't visit dying relatives, and then went to a $350 per plate dinner with lobbyists, breaking every rule he'd imposed. They saw policies that have turned San Francisco from one of America's most beautiful cities into an open-air drug market, with human feces on the sidewalks. And they saw you sit there hour after hour and tell us this is a model. This is success. This is what you want to do to the whole country. Kennedy leaned forward, his voice hardening, sharpening. Governor, I know you're thinking about 2028. Everybody knows it. You've been running for president since the day you took office as governor, maybe before that. Maybe your entire political career has been building to this. Every policy, every speech, every photo opportunity, every carefully crafted Instagram post. It's all about positioning yourself for the White House. So let me give you some free advice from a simple country senator who's been around politics for a while. His voice turned to steel. The American people aren't stupid. They're not fooled by slick presentations. They can see through the hair gel and the smooth talk and the perfect suits. They watch the news. They see the videos of thieves walking out of stores. They talk to their friends and family members who moved to their states from California. They know what's happening. And when they see someone whose state is failing, whose policies have demonstrably made things worse, standing up and saying, this is the future. This is the model. Follow me. They know what they're looking at. They're looking at someone who's either delusional or dishonest. Kennedy paused. Let that sink in. And I don't think you're delusional, Governor. I think you're smart, very smart, which means you know your policies aren't working. You know people are leaving. You know the homelessness crisis is getting worse. You know the high-speed rail is a disaster. You know it all. And you're standing here anyway telling us everything's fine, asking for more power, more control, more of America to run the way you've run California. He stood up from his seat, gathering his materials slowly. You came here to audition for president, but what you showed us today is exactly why you should never be president. Not now, not ever. Because you're not interested in solving problems. You're interested in talking about solving problems while the problems get worse. You're not interested in serving the people. You're interested in the appearance of service. The photo ops, the press conferences, the applause lines, the magazine covers, the viral moments, all while real people suffer the consequences of your failures. You had every advantage, Governor. California should be paradise, perfect weather, incredible natural resources, world-class universities, the most innovative companies on earth, the most talented people, the most opportunity, and you have turned it into a place people are desperate to leave. Kennedy picked up his folders and tapped them into a neat stack. California used to be the Golden State, the place everyone wanted to go, the American dream made real. Go west, young man. That was California, the future, the promise, the dream. And in just a few years, you and politicians like you have turned it into a warning, a cautionary tale, a case study in how progressive ideology taken to its logical extreme can destroy even the most blessed and beautiful places. He looked directly at Newsom. The cameras zoomed in on both their faces. Someone did something to California, Governor, and those people are you. The politicians who valued appearing virtuous over being effective, who cared more about the applause of their ideological allies than the welfare of their citizens, who spent billions of dollars on programs that don't work and called it compassion, who implemented policies that failed and called it progress. Kennedy turned toward the door, stopped, looked back. The American people are watching, Governor. They've been watching this whole hearing, millions of them, and they're not going to forget what they saw today, what they learned. They're going to remember that when you had a chance to explain yourself, to account for your failures, to show some humility, some honesty, some awareness of reality, you couldn't do it. You just kept insisting everything was fine, everything was great, California's thriving, while the evidence piled up around you like snow in a blizzard. He shook his head slowly. That's not leadership, Governor. That's denial. And America can't afford a president who's in denial about the consequences of his own policies. America can't afford a president who lives in a different reality than the rest of us. Kennedy looked at Chairman Sanders. Mr. Chairman, I yield back my time. Thank you for your patience. The room erupted like a volcano. Reporters shouted questions over each other, voices colliding. Photographers' cameras clicked in rapid machine gun succession. Democratic senators huddled in urgent whispered conversation. Republican senators sat back, with expressions ranging from satisfaction to shock to something like awe at what they'd just witnessed. At the witness table, Gavin Newsom sat frozen, completely still, his famous poise gone, his California confidence evaporated, his smooth-talking persona shattered. His communications director was whispering urgently in his ear, but he didn't seem to hear her, didn't seem to hear anything. His chief of staff was already on his phone, damage control mode fully activated, calling everyone in Sacramento, everyone in California, everyone who might be able to help. Chairman Sanders banged his gavel repeatedly, desperately. Order, order, this hearing is in recess. This hearing is now in recess. Newsom finally stood. His movements were mechanical, robotic. His famous swagger was gone. He gathered his papers, though there was nothing in them that could help him now, nothing that could undo what had just happened, and walked toward the exit. Reporters surged forward like a wave. Governor, do you have a response to Senator Kennedy's questions? Governor, what about the $20 billion? Governor, can you account for that spending? Governor, are you still planning to run in 2028? Newsom's security team formed a protective wedge, pushing through the crowd. He didn't answer any questions, didn't make eye contact with anyone, didn't even acknowledge the reporters were there. He just walked, as quickly as dignity would allow, toward the door, toward escape. As he passed Kennedy's seat, the senator was calmly organizing his folders. chatting with an aide about something that appeared completely unrelated to what had just happened. Kennedy glanced up as Newsom passed. Their eyes met for just a moment, a brief second of connection. Kennedy gave him that same warm, folksy smile he'd offered at the start of the hearing 6 hours ago. "Safe travels back to California, Governor. Have a good flight." Newsom didn't respond, didn't react, just walked out of the hearing room and didn't look back. The door closed behind him with a soft click that somehow sounded like a gunshot. The C-SPAN video of the hearing hit 45 million views within 24 hours. By the end of the week, it had been viewed over 100 million times across all platforms. YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, TikTok, Instagram, Telegram, Reddit. Clips were everywhere. 10-second clips, minute-long clips. The full 6-hour hearing uploaded, downloaded, re-uploaded, shared, and analyzed frame by political commentators across the entire spectrum. "Kennedy destroys Newsom" became a top search term on Google. The full hearing was uploaded to dozens of channels. Conservative channels titled it "Kennedy destroys Newsom." Liberal channels tried "Kennedy questions Newsom on California policies." But the framing didn't matter. The content was devastating regardless of how you packaged it. The mainstream media tried to control the narrative, tried desperately. GOP senator launches partisan assault on California governor. Kennedy's questioning criticized as political theater. Right-wing ambush of progressive leader. But the framing didn't stick, couldn't stick. The clips were too damaging. The facts were too clear. The numbers were too stark. People could watch for themselves and make their own judgments. And they did. Democratic response was notably, conspicuously muted. Nancy Pelosi released a brief statement calling the hearing a partisan exercise designed to undermine democratic governance. But she didn't specifically defend Newsom's record, didn't address any of the facts Kennedy had presented. Chuck Schumer declined to comment entirely, referred all questions to his press secretary, who also declined to comment. The potential 2028 rivals, Gretchen Whitmer, J.B. Pritzker, Josh Shapiro, issued no statements at all. Radio silence, a deafening silence that spoke volumes. Within the Democratic Party, the quiet conversations, the private phone calls, were far less charitable. "He walked right into it," one Senate aide told Politico anonymously. "He thought he was going to give a campaign speech and Kennedy ate him alive." Another Democratic strategist was even blunter. "Gavin's always been good at talking, great at talking. Turns out he's not so good when someone talks back, when someone asks real questions." The California media was split. The San Francisco Chronicle published a defensive editorial arguing that Kennedy had cherry-picked statistics, ignored California's genuine accomplishments, and engaged in obvious political grandstanding. The piece was ratioed into absolute oblivion on social media. Commenters posted links to the actual census data, the actual HUD reports, the actual state audits. Every claim in the editorial was systematically demolished. The Sacramento Bee took a different approach, published an investigative piece titled "Questions Newsom Must Answer," laid out 15 specific questions about homeless spending, high-speed rail costs, and public safety policies. Asked the governor's office to provide detailed answers. Newsom's office declined to provide answers. The Los Angeles Times, after what sources described as a week of intense internal debate, published an editorial calling for greater transparency in homeless spending and a complete reassessment of the high-speed rail project. For California's paper of record, it was practically a declaration of war on Newsom. National polling showed the damage in brutal clarity. Newsom's favorability rating dropped 14 points in 2 weeks. Among independents, the crucial swing voters, the drop was 21 points. In 2028 primary polling, he fell from first place to fourth, behind Whitmer, behind Shapiro, behind even Pete Buttigieg. The question, "Would you vote for Gavin Newsom for president?" showed 62% saying no. But the most devastating polls, the ones that really hurt, were from California itself. For the first time in his governorship, Newsom's approval rating in his own state dropped below 50%. A recall effort that had been languishing, going nowhere, suddenly found new life. started gathering signatures at 3 times the previous rate. Republican challengers who had been written off as having no chance began raising serious money. Real money. From donors who suddenly believed California might be flippable. 3 weeks after the hearing, Newsom held a press conference in Sacramento. It was supposed to be about wildfire preparedness, but everyone knew what the real topic would be, what everyone was really there to hear. He looked tired. The famous Newsom polish was still there. The suit was still perfect. The hair was still perfect. But something was different. The confidence that had always animated him, that had always been his signature, seemed forced now, artificial. "I want to address the recent Senate hearing," he said, reading from carefully prepared remarks. Senator Kennedy engaged in a partisan attack designed to distort California's record and undermine confidence in progressive governance. His questions were misleading. His statistics were cherry-picked, and his conclusions were predetermined. He looked up from the paper. "But I also want to acknowledge that we have work to do. California faces real challenges: homelessness, housing costs, public safety. These are issues that affect real people, and we need to do better. We can do better. I'm committed to improving outcomes for all Californians." The press wasn't satisfied. "Governor," a reporter called out, Senator Kennedy asked where $20 billion in homeless spending went. "Can you answer that question now? Can you tell us specifically where the money went?" "We've invested in a comprehensive approach to homelessness that includes shelter operations, outreach teams, mental health services, substance abuse treatment, permanent supportive housing across multiple counties." "Governor," the reporter interrupted, "can you account for the spending, specifically? Can you tell us what outcomes were achieved? How many people were helped?" "We're implementing new metrics and accountability measures to track outcomes more effectively going forward." "Governor, are you still planning to run for president in 2028? The question everyone wanted answered. Newsom paused. A long pause. You could see him calculating. This was the question everyone was waiting for. The question that would define his political future. "I'm focused on serving the people of California," he said finally. "That's my job. That's my commitment. That's where my attention needs to be. Any decisions about the future will be made at the appropriate time." It wasn't a no, but it wasn't the confident yes that everyone had expected a month earlier. It wasn't, "I'm absolutely running and I'm going to win." The press conference ended after 20 minutes. No real answers provided. No accountability accepted. Just more of the same smooth talk that had stopped working. Consequences continued to unfold over the following months like a slow-motion car crash. The California State Auditor announced a comprehensive review of all homeless program spending from 2019 forward. The preliminary findings, which leaked to the press through multiple sources, were absolutely damning. Hundreds of millions of dollars spent with no documented outcomes whatsoever. Contracts awarded without competitive bidding. Administrative costs far exceeding industry standards. Service providers who couldn't demonstrate they'd helped a single person get off the streets permanently. The High-Speed Rail Authority quietly released a revised timeline, buried it on a Friday afternoon, pushing the Merced to Bakersfield segment completion to 2030 at the earliest. The full Los Angeles to San Francisco system was officially moved to long-term planning phase, which everyone understood to mean never. It's never happening. Write it off. Proposition 47 reform appeared on the next ballot. Voters approved it by 18 points. A landslide, raising the felony theft threshold back to $450 and adding new penalties for repeat offenders and organized retail theft. Newsom, reading the political winds correctly, declined to campaign against it, declined to defend his previous position, just went silent. In San Francisco, a new mayor was elected on a platform of public safety and common-sense governance. Her slogan was, "San Francisco deserves better." Within 6 months of taking office, the open-air drug markets had been dispersed. Not eliminated, but dispersed, pushed out. The police were enforcing basic laws again. The feces tracking app became unnecessary. Tourists started returning to Union Square. The doom loop began to reverse. The exodus from California continued, but the composition changed in a telling way. Polls and surveys showed that the people leaving were increasingly citing governance and policy as their primary reasons, not just cost of living. They weren't just fleeing high prices. They were fleeing what California had become, what it represented, the failed policies, the dysfunction, the denial. And in the 2028 presidential race, the name Gavin Newsom was conspicuously absent from every list, every poll, every discussion. He announced in January 2027 that he would not seek the presidency. The statement was gracious, dignified, cited a desire to focus on completing important work in California, spending more time with family, the usual reasons politicians give. It fooled absolutely no one. Kennedy killed his campaign before it started, one Democratic operative told The Atlantic anonymously. That hearing was supposed to be Newsom's coming-out party, his national debut. Instead, it was his funeral, political obituary written in real time on national television. 1 year after the hearing, a reporter from The New Yorker tracked down Senator Kennedy in his Capitol Hill office for a retrospective interview. An anniversary piece looking back at the hearing that changed everything. "Do you feel you were too hard on Governor Newsom?" she asked. "That you crossed a line?" Kennedy smiled, that same folksy smile, leaned back in his chair. "Too hard, ma'am. I asked him about publicly available data, census numbers, budget documents, state audits, his own policies that he implemented and defended. If asking questions about facts is too hard, then maybe the problem isn't with the questions. Maybe the problem is with the facts. Some have said the hearing was political theater, that you were more interested in creating viral moments than seeking truth." Kennedy shrugged, gave a small laugh. "I asked questions, he gave answers. The American people watched and made up their own minds. That's how it's supposed to work. If the answers made him look bad, well, that's not my fault. I didn't make him spend $20 billion on homeless programs that didn't work. I didn't make him go to the French Laundry during lockdown. I just asked about it, just shined a light on it." "Do you think he would have been a good president?" Kennedy paused, considered the question seriously for a long moment. "I think Governor Newsom is very good at one thing, looking like a president, the hair, the suits, the smooth talk, the California confidence, the magazine cover appeal. He looks the part. Central casting couldn't do better. If you were making a movie and you needed someone to play president, you'd cast him in a heartbeat." He leaned forward. "But looking the part isn't the same as being able to do the job. A president has to solve problems, not just talk about them. A president has to make hard choices, not just popular ones. A president has to be honest with the American people, even when the truth is uncomfortable, even when the truth hurts." Kennedy gestured to a bound copy of the hearing transcript sitting on his bookshelf. What that hearing showed, what millions of Americans saw for themselves, is that Governor Newsom isn't interested in solving problems. He's interested in the appearance of solving problems. He's interested in saying the right things, taking the right positions, getting the applause of the right people, being on the right side of history, as they say. But when you look at actual results, actual outcomes, actual improvements in people's lives, there's nothing there. Just words, just promises, just intentions. He shook his head. "That's not what America needs. America has plenty of politicians who are good at talking. We're drowning in good talkers. What America needs are leaders who are good at doing, who care more about whether something works than whether it polls well, who are willing to admit when they're wrong and change course, who put results over rhetoric." Kennedy smiled. "And that's not Gavin Newsom. Maybe it never was, but after that hearing, everyone knows it. The mask came off. The truth came out." The reporter asked one final question. "What do you think your legacy from that hearing will be? What will people remember?" Kennedy thought for a moment, stared out the window at the Capitol dome. "I hope the legacy is that asking questions matters, that holding powerful people accountable matters, that no one, no matter how polished, how smooth, how well-connected, how good-looking, is above being asked, 'Did this work? Where did the money go? Why should we trust you with more power?'" He stood up, signaling the interview was over. Some people did something to California, and for too long nobody asked them to explain themselves. Nobody held them accountable. They just kept getting promoted, kept getting elected, kept failing upward. That hearing was just asking questions. Basic questions. And it turns out when you ask the right questions, when you demand real answers, the truth has a way of coming out. Truth has a way of revealing itself. He walked the reporter to the door, opened it for her. The truth set a lot of people free that day, free from the illusion that California was working, free from the idea that Gavin Newsom had all the answers, free to see reality as it actually is, not as politicians want us to see it, not as the media frames it. Kennedy smiled one last time. "That's all I did, ma'am. I just asked questions. Questions any citizen could have asked. Questions any journalist should have asked. The truth did the rest. Truth always does if you give it a chance." In California, the work of rebuilding continued. Slowly, painfully. The homeless crisis didn't disappear overnight. Problems that took decades to create don't vanish in months. But the new accountability measures meant that money was finally being tracked properly. Outcomes were finally being measured. Programs that didn't work were finally being ended instead of expanded. And programs that did work were finally being scaled up. The homeless population stabilized, then began to decline, slowly, gradually, but genuinely, for the first time in years. The high-speed rail project was officially paused in 2029. Indefinitely suspended pending a complete financial and engineering review. The billions already spent were written off as a sunk cost, a loss, a monument to hubris and poor planning and the limits of government ambition without government competence. Private companies, learning from Texas's success with actual high-speed rail, began exploring genuine options for California, but this time without taxpayer money at risk. Without government guarantees, without the bureaucracy and delays and cost overruns that had doomed the government project. Crime remained a challenge, but the Proposition 47 reforms made a measurable difference. Retail theft declined noticeably. Stores that had closed began to reopen. Businesses that had written off California started reconsidering. The San Francisco doom loop reversed. Slowly, tentatively. As businesses gained confidence that the laws would actually be enforced, that property rights would be protected, that you could operate a store without losing half your inventory to theft, and the exodus from California, the great migration that had seemed irreversible, it slowed, then stopped, then began to reverse. People who had left started to return. Businesses that had relocated began opening California offices again. California, the Golden State, it turned out, wasn't beyond saving after all. It just needed leaders who cared more about results than rhetoric, who valued competence over ideology, who were willing to admit failure and change course. Gavin Newsom finished his term as governor in January 2027, didn't run for re-election, didn't run for any other office. He joined a prestigious San Francisco law firm, made partner immediately, made the occasional speech about climate change at universities and conferences, appeared less and less frequently in public life, faded from the spotlight he'd spent his entire career seeking. Occasionally, interviewers would ask him about the Kennedy hearing, the hearing that ended his presidential ambitions. His answers were always the same, always identical. It was a partisan attack. The questions were unfair, taken out of context. My record speaks for itself. California's accomplishments speak for themselves. But the record did speak for itself. And that was precisely the problem. That was exactly why he'd never be president. Years later, political scientists would study the Kennedy-Newsom hearing as a case study in political accountability. How one afternoon of tough questions, 6 hours of sustained interrogation, could change the trajectory of a political career and maybe even alter the course of a state. The lesson they drew wasn't complicated, wasn't sophisticated. Facts matter, questions matter, holding powerful people accountable matters. Reality matters more than rhetoric, results matter more than intentions. And sometimes when someone stands up and simply asks, "Did this work? Where did the money go? Why should we trust you?" Sometimes that's enough. Sometimes that's all it takes to change everything. If you enjoyed this deep dive into one of the most consequential political moments of the decade, make sure to hit that subscribe button right now. We break down the real stories behind the headlines, the moments that change history, the confrontations that expose truth. Don't just watch politics, understand it. Subscribe now and never miss another story that matters. Someone did something to California, and finally someone asked them to explain it. That's all that happened. That's all it took. Just questions, just truth, just accountability, and everything changed.